federal agent murdered an innocent 17-year-old girl and hid her body in his own bedroom while pretending to help search for her. Trevor Mathis was a decorated ATF agent, respected, trusted, a man who swore an oath to protect. But on November 14, 2019, police knocked on his door with a search warrant and found something that would shatter an entire community. 17-year-old Nicole Harper's lifeless body was lying beneath his bed, the same girl whose missing persons case he'd volunteered to assist with, the same girl whose parents he'd looked in the eye and promised to bring home safely. Before we continue, let me take this opportunity to thank you so much for supporting our channel. Just choosing to watch our video means a lot to us. Before we go any further, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this is your first time here. Nicole Harper was a junior at Riverside High School in Charlotte, North Carolina. She played violin in the school orchestra. She volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday. She had college brochures stacked on her desk and a future that should have been bright. On the morning of November 9th, she kissed her mother goodbye and walked out the door to catch her bus. She never came home. Her parents, Linda and Robert Harper, called the police by 6 that evening. Nicole always texted when she'd be late, always. When her phone went straight to voicemail, Linda knew something was catastrophically wrong. By midnight, search parties were forming. By morning, the FBI was involved. And standing right there in the Harper family's living room, offering comfort and expertise, was Trevor Mathis. He was 42 years old, 15 years with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. He'd worked task forces on gang violence and human trafficking. He had commendations. He had credibility. When he told Linda Harper that he'd personally make sure every resource was deployed to find Nicole, she believed him. Everyone believed him. What no one knew was that Nicole was already dead, and her body was less than 8 miles away, hidden in the home of the man who killed her. For 5 days, Trevor Mathis participated in search operations. He reviewed security footage. He interviewed Nicole's friends. He stood beside Robert Harper at a press conference and spoke about the urgency of finding her. He looked directly into news cameras and said the words that would later haunt prosecutors. "We will not rest until Nicole is home." But investigators were beginning to notice inconsistencies, small things at first. Trevor's timeline didn't quite match up. His volunteering seemed too eager, too involved for someone who wasn't officially assigned to the case. And then a detective named Kiera Walsh found something in Nicole's phone records that changed everything. Nicole Harper's last known location was 3 blocks from her high school at 3:47 p.m. on November 9th. A traffic camera captured her walking alone on Prescott Avenue. She was wearing her blue backpack and white sneakers. 17 seconds of footage. That was all investigators had. Linda Harper described her daughter as responsible and cautious. Nicole didn't talk to strangers. She didn't take rides from people she didn't know. She had pepper spray on her keychain that Linda had insisted she carry. The idea that Nicole simply vanished didn't make sense. Someone had to have taken her, someone she might have trusted. The first 48 hours of any missing persons case are critical. Detective Kiera Walsh knew this. She'd worked missing persons for 9 years and had seen how quickly trails go cold. She organized search grids. She pulled surveillance from every business and home along Nicole's route. She interviewed over 60 people, classmates, teachers, neighbors, bus drivers. Everyone said the same thing. Nicole was kind, quiet, focused on school. She didn't party. She didn't have a boyfriend. Her closest friend, a girl named Ava Chen, told police that Nicole had been stressed about college applications, but otherwise seemed normal. Nothing unusual. No one suspicious in her life. Except the searches came up empty. No body, no witnesses, no ransom calls, just silence. That's when federal agencies got involved. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived on day 3. They brought cadaver dogs, forensic specialists, and behavioral analysts. And among the local federal agents who offered assistance was Trevor Mathis. He wasn't assigned to the case officially. His department didn't handle missing persons, but he lived in the area, he knew the community, and he told supervisors he wanted to help in any way he could. No one questioned it. Agents helping with local cases wasn't unusual. It looked exactly like it was supposed to look like, a dedicated public servant doing the right thing. Trevor spent hours at the command center. He reviewed maps. He suggested search locations. He even drove Linda to identify a jacket found near the river. It wasn't Nicole's, but Trevor held Linda's hand while she cried anyway. Detective Walsh later said she remembered thinking Trevor was one of the good ones, compassionate, professional, committed. But on day 4 of the search, Walsh was going through Nicole's phone records again. Most of the calls and texts were routine, friends, parents, school reminders. But there was one number that appeared 6 times in the 2 weeks before Nicole disappeared, a number that didn't belong to anyone in Nicole's known circle. Walsh ran the number. It belonged to Trevor Mathis. At first, Walsh thought it might be a mistake or a coincidence. Maybe Nicole had called a tip line. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. So she approached Trevor directly, professional, calm, just a routine follow-up. "Trevor, I'm seeing your number in Nicole's call log. Can you help me understand why she'd have been calling you?" Trevor didn't hesitate. He said Nicole had reached out weeks earlier asking about career advice. She was interested in federal law enforcement. He'd spoken to her a few times about the application process, academy requirements, that sort of thing. He said he'd mentioned it to her school counselor, who could verify Nicole had expressed interest in criminal justice careers. It sounded plausible. Walsh checked at the counselor. Nicole had indeed talked about law enforcement as a possible career path. The story seemed to hold. But Walsh couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. 6 phone calls. Why hadn't Trevor mentioned this connection immediately when the case started? Why wait until directly asked? She pulled phone records for the day Nicole disappeared. Trevor's phone pinged off a cell tower 4 blocks from where Nicole was last seen, at 3:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the traffic camera footage. Walsh brought this to her lieutenant. She requested a warrant to search Trevor's home and vehicle. The lieutenant hesitated. Trevor Mathis was a federal agent. Accusing him without solid evidence could destroy careers. But Walsh pushed. She had location data. She had phone contact. She had a missing girl and a timeline that put Trevor in the right place at the right time. The warrant was approved on November 14th, 5 days after Nicole Harper disappeared. 3 patrol units and 2 FBI agents arrived at Trevor Mathis's home at 6:18 a.m. Trevor Mathis answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt. He looked surprised, but not panicked. Detective Walsh stood on his porch holding the search warrant. She watched his face carefully, watched for the telltale signs of guilt, rapid blinking, jaw tension, hands fidgeting. Trevor read the warrant slowly. Then he looked at Walsh and said, "I understand. Do what you need to do." He stepped aside and let them in. His home was a modest 2-bedroom ranch in a quiet subdivision, neat, organized. There were framed commendations on the walls, photos of Trevor at shooting ranges and training exercises, a bookshelf filled with law enforcement manuals and crime novels. Everything about the place screamed federal agent. Walsh assigned teams to different areas. 2 officers took the garage and vehicle. 2 took the kitchen and living areas. She and FBI Special Agent Monroe took the bedrooms. Trevor sat on his couch with an officer watching him. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't make phone calls. He just sat there, hands folded, waiting. The first bedroom was clearly a guest room. Minimal furniture, untouched, nothing remarkable. Walsh moved to the master bedroom. Standard setup, queen bed, dresser, closet. She started with the closet, checked pockets of jackets, looked through shoe boxes, standard procedure. Agent Monroe checked the dresser drawers, clothes, documents, a handgun in the nightstand with proper licensing, everything by the book. Then Monroe knelt down to check under the bed. He went silent. Walsh turned. "What is it?" Monroe's voice came out flat, professional training kicking in to suppress the horror. "Kira, you need to see this." Walsh knelt beside him. She pulled out her flashlight and aimed it under the bed frame. A blue backpack, white sneakers, and wrapped in a plastic tarp, the unmistakable shape of a human body. Walsh's hands started shaking. She'd been a detective for nearly a decade. She'd seen terrible things. But finding a child's body in a federal agent's bedroom was something else entirely. She steadied herself, pulled out her radio. "We have a 1054. Repeat, we have a body. Secure the scene. Get ME and CSI here now." In the living room, Trevor Mathis didn't move. The officer watching him said later that Trevor's expression never changed. No shock, no denial. He just stared at the wall like he'd been expecting this moment. Walsh walked out of the bedroom. She looked at Trevor. She'd worked hundreds of cases, interrogated dozens of suspects, but standing in front of a man she'd worked alongside, a man who'd comforted a grieving mother while hiding her daughter's corpse in his house, it took everything in her not to lose her composure. "Trevor Mathis, you are under arrest for the murder of Nicole Harper."
He didn't resist, didn't speak. He stood up, turned around, and put his hands behind his back. The officer cuffed him, read him his rights. Trevor acknowledged each one with a small nod. As they walked him to the patrol car, neighbors came out onto their porches, people who'd lived next to Trevor for years, who'd waved to him, who'd trusted him. They watched in stunned silence as a federal agent was loaded into the back of a police car. Linda Harper got the call at 7:43 a.m. Detective Walsh delivered the news in person. She sat in the Harper family's living room, the same room where Trevor had offered his help days earlier, and told Linda that Nicole was dead, that her body had been found, that the man who'd killed her was in custody. Linda didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just stared at Walsh with hollow eyes and asked one question: who? When Walsh said Trevor Mathis's name, Linda's face went blank. She remembered him, the kind agent who'd held her hand, who'd promised to bring Nicole home. Robert Harper, sitting beside his wife, stood up and put his fist through the living room wall. The medical examiner arrived at Trevor's house at 8:15 a.m. Nicole's body was carefully removed. Preliminary examination suggested she'd been dead for approximately 5 days. Cause of death appeared to be asphyxiation. Her neck showed signs of manual strangulation. She'd been killed the same day she disappeared, the same day Trevor's phone pinged near her last known location, the same day he'd shown up at the Harper home offering to help find her. Crime scene investigators spent 11 hours processing Trevor's house. They found Nicole's phone in a kitchen drawer, powered off. They found her school ID in his car's glove compartment. They found search history on his laptop, showing he'd looked up missing person investigation protocols and how long before a body decomposes. He'd been researching how to get away with murder while pretending to help solve it. The news broke within hours. Local stations interrupted regular programming. Federal agent arrested in murder of missing teen. By noon, it was national. By evening, it was international. The ATF issued a statement. Trevor Mathis had been placed on immediate administrative leave. They were cooperating fully with local law enforcement. They expressed condolences to the Harper family. The words were careful, detached, an organization trying to distance itself from a monster in its ranks. Detective Walsh knew the hardest part was still ahead. She needed to understand why. She needed a timeline. She needed to know how a decorated federal agent had become a murderer. Trevor invoked his right to an attorney within hours of his arrest. He didn't give a confession, didn't explain himself, just sat in the interrogation room, silent and stone-faced, while his lawyer advised him to say nothing. But the evidence spoke for him. Investigators pulled security footage from a gas station 4 blocks from Nicole's school. The timestamp read 3:51 p.m. on November 9th. The video showed Trevor's vehicle, a dark blue Ford Explorer, pulling into the parking lot. Nicole Harper was visible in the passenger seat. She'd gotten into his car willingly. That detail devastated Linda more than anything else. Nicole had trusted him. She'd been told her whole life not to talk to strangers, and she hadn't. She'd gotten into a car with a federal agent, someone who represented safety, authority, protection. Phone records revealed the full scope of Trevor's contact with Nicole. It had started 6 weeks before her disappearance. The first call lasted 3 minutes, then 5, then 15. Text messages showed Trevor offering advice about law enforcement careers, offering to give her a tour of the federal building, telling her she'd make an excellent agent someday. To Nicole, it had seemed like mentorship. To investigators, it looked like grooming. One text from Trevor to Nicole, sent 2 days before she disappeared, read, "I have some academy brochures in my car. Want to meet up after school so I can give them to you? Won't take long." Nicole responded, "Sure, thank you so much for all your help." That was the trap. Simple, clean. A teenager excited about her future, trusting an authority figure who'd shown interest in helping her. Forensic analysis of Trevor's home revealed more. Luminol testing showed traces of blood on the bedroom carpet that had been cleaned. DNA testing confirmed it was Nicole's. The medical examiner's full autopsy report came back on November 18th. Nicole Harper had been manually strangled. The hyoid bone in her neck was fractured. Petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes indicated she'd struggled for air. Time of death was estimated between 4 and 5 p.m. on November 9th. Less than 2 hours after she'd gotten into Trevor's car, she was dead.
There was no evidence of sexual assault. That brought Linda Harper no comfort. Her daughter had still been murdered, still been hidden under a bed like garbage, still been used as a sick trophy by a man who then stood in their living room and pretended to care. Investigators found a journal in Trevor's nightstand. The entries were sporadic but disturbing. He'd written about feeling invisible, about wanting to matter, about how no one truly appreciated the work he did. The final entry, dated November 8th, 1 day before Nicole's murder, read, "Everyone always underestimates me. They'll see soon enough." Psychologists brought in to analyze Trevor's behavior suggested he'd been experiencing a crisis of significance. 15 years in federal law enforcement without major recognition. No major busts, no headlines, just steady, unremarkable work. The profile suggested he'd wanted to feel powerful, wanted to control something, someone. Nicole Harper had been available, trusting, vulnerable. And then, in a twisted extension of his need for control and recognition, Trevor had inserted himself into the investigation of his own crime. He'd wanted to be close to it, to watch people search desperately for something he knew they'd never find, to console a mother whose daughter he'd murdered. It was narcissism and sadism wrapped together. The Charlotte community was shattered. Vigils were held outside Riverside High School. Nicole's friends sobbed and held candles. Her violin teacher played a piece Nicole had been practicing. Her parents stood together, Robert's arm around Linda's shoulders, both of them looking like they'd aged 10 years in 10 days. Trust in law enforcement took a devastating hit. If a federal agent could be a murderer, who could anyone trust? Parents held their children tighter. Schools increased security. The fear was palpable. And Trevor Mathis sat in a county jail cell, still saying nothing. The district attorney's office moved quickly. They wanted Trevor Mathis prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. First-degree murder, abuse of authority, kidnapping. The charges kept stacking. Trevor's attorney tried to negotiate, tried to suggest second-degree murder, tried to paint a picture of a moment of passion, a mistake, an accident that spiraled out of control. But the evidence destroyed every argument. The phone records showing weeks of contact, the premeditated meeting after school, the cleanup efforts, the participation in the investigation while Nicole's body decomposed under his bed. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated murder. The trial began on March 2, 2020. Jury selection took 3 days. The prosecution needed people who could handle graphic evidence and testimony while remaining impartial. The defense needed people who wouldn't immediately convict based on Trevor's betrayal of his oath and position. The courtroom was packed every single day. Media from across the country descended on Charlotte. Linda and Robert Harper sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. They attended every session, heard every piece of evidence, watched the man who'd murdered their daughter sit expressionless at the defense table. The prosecution's case was airtight. They presented the cell tower data placing Trevor near Nicole's last known location. They showed the gas station footage of Nicole in his vehicle. They presented the text messages, the grooming pattern, the evidence found in his home. The medical examiner testified about Nicole's injuries, about how strangulation is one of the most intimate forms of murder, how it requires sustained physical contact, how the killer watches their victim die. The jury looked sick. Detective Walsh testified about finding Nicole's body, about Trevor's behavior during the investigation, about how he'd volunteered to help search while knowing exactly where Nicole was. Several jurors wiped tears from their eyes. The most devastating testimony came from Linda Harper herself. The prosecution asked her to describe the moment Trevor Mathis came to her home offering help. Linda's voice shook as she recounted how he'd held her hand, how he'd looked her in the eyes and promised to bring Nicole home, how she'd trusted him because he was a federal agent. "I believed him," Linda said, staring directly at Trevor. "I believed you, and my daughter believed you too. That's why she's dead." Trevor didn't look at her, didn't react, just stared straight ahead like he was somewhere else entirely. The defense had almost nothing to work with. They tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that the timeline wasn't definitive, that reasonable doubt existed. But every argument fell apart under the weight of facts. Trevor's attorney put him on the stand against all conventional wisdom. It was a desperate move. Trevor was their only chance at humanizing him, at creating some shred of sympathy. It backfired spectacularly. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor asked Trevor directly, "Why did you volunteer to help search for Nicole Harper when you knew she was dead in your home?" Trevor paused. Then he said, "I thought I could help." The prosecutor pressed, "Help? Help the family of the girl you murdered?" Trevor's attorney objected. The judge sustained it. But the damage was done. The jury had heard enough. The prosecution's closing argument was simple and devastating. Trevor Mathis didn't just murder Nicole Harper. He murdered her, hid her body, and then tortured her family by pretending to search for her. He is not just a killer. He is a predator who used his position of authority to gain trust, to gain access, and ultimately to take an innocent life. He betrayed his oath, he betrayed his community, and he betrayed a 17-year-old girl who believed he was someone she could trust. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts, first-degree murder, kidnapping, abuse of authority under federal law. Linda Harper collapsed into her husband's arms. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and anguish. Trevor showed no emotion. He was handcuffed and led away. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge showed no mercy. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. additional consecutive sentences for the other charges. Trevor Mathis would die in prison. As he was let out of the courtroom for the final time, Linda Harper stood up. She didn't yell, didn't scream. She just said, loud enough for him to hear, "I hope every single day you spend in that cell, you remember her face." Trevor paused for just a second, then kept walking. Nicole Harper was buried on November 23, 2019, 2 weeks after her body was found. The funeral was held at Riverside Community Church. Over 800 people attended, classmates, teachers, strangers who'd never met Nicole but felt her loss in their bones. Linda Harper gave a eulogy. She talked about Nicole's kindness, about how she'd volunteer at the animal shelter every Saturday without being asked, about how she'd leave notes in her parents' lunches telling them she loved them, about the future that had been stolen from her. "My daughter wanted to help people," Linda said, her voice steady despite the tears. "She wanted to make the world safer, and the person who took that dream from her was someone who was supposed to represent everything she aspired to be." The irony was crushing. Nicole had died because she trusted the exact profession she'd wanted to join. In the months that followed, the ATF underwent internal reviews. Questions were raised about how Trevor Mathis had remained employed for 15 years without anyone noticing warning signs. Personnel files were examined. Psychological evaluations were reviewed. The agency implemented new protocols for monitoring employee behavior and mandatory counseling. But no policy change could bring Nicole back. Detective Kiera Walsh continued working missing persons cases. She never forgot Nicole's case. In interviews years later, she said it changed how she approached investigations. She trusted her instincts more, questioned authority when something felt wrong. She said that if there was any lesson from Nicole's murder, it was that evil doesn't always look like a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it wears a badge. The Harper family started a foundation in Nicole's name, the Nicole Harper Trust, focused on teaching young people about predatory behavior and recognizing grooming tactics. They partnered with schools across North Carolina to provide education programs. Linda and Robert couldn't save their daughter, but they were determined to save someone else's. People think predators are obvious. They think their kids will recognize danger, but Nicole was smart. She was careful, and she still died because she trusted someone in a position of authority. We want kids to know that it's okay to question adults. It's okay to say no. It's okay to trust your gut, even when someone seems legitimate. The foundation has since reached over 50,000 students. It's expanded to other states, and every year on November 9th, the day Nicole disappeared, they hold a memorial walk. Thousands of people participate. They wear blue ribbons, Nicole's favorite color. Trevor Mathis is currently incarcerated at a maximum security federal prison. He's in protective custody because even among criminals, child killers are the lowest form of life. He receives no visitors. He has filed no appeals. By all accounts, he simply exists in his cell, serving a sentence that will end only with his death. Some people wonder if he feels remorse, if he thinks about what he did, if he understands the magnitude of the lives he destroyed. But those questions don't really matter. What matters is that he can never hurt anyone else. Nicole's bedroom in the Harper home remains unchanged. Linda goes in there sometimes and sits on the bed. She looks at the college brochures still stacked on the desk, at the violin in the corner, at photos on the wall of a girl who smiled easily and loved deeply. "My daughter wanted to help people," Linda said, her voice steady despite the tears. "She wanted to make the world safer, and the person who took that dream from her was someone who was supposed to represent everything she aspired to be." The irony was crushing. Nicole had died because she trusted the exact profession she'd wanted to join. Nicole Harper would have graduated high school in 2020. She would have gone to college. Maybe she would have become a federal agent like she'd dreamed. Maybe she would have changed careers and become a veterinarian. Maybe she would have gotten married, had children, lived a full and beautiful life. We'll never know, because a man who swore to protect and serve decided his need for power was more important than a 17-year-old girl's life. So here's the question we're left with. How do we teach our children to trust authority while also teaching them to recognize when that authority is being abused? How do we balance safety with awareness? And how do we ensure that the people we give power to are worthy of that responsibility? Do you think enough is being done to prevent tragedies like this? What would you do differently if you were in Nicole's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you to hold your loved ones a little closer, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this video. Let Nicole's story be a reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable and question those who abuse their power. Thank you for watching, and remember Nicole Harper. Remember what was taken from her, and remember that justice, while important, can never replace what was lost.